Do superheroes need caffeine? So many of them have been given some form of PEDs, or are who they are, because of freak accidents that change their biology. But still, maybe they also need a pick-me-up from time to time. Well, since most superheroes seem to live in North America, they all have easy access to something that can help with that. Spark Plug Coffee. That's because this great product can be purchased by anyone in the US or Canada, and Canadians get free shipping. People in either country will get their orders within a week, too. We're happy to let you all know that Sparkplug is the freshest beans in Canada. They're also fairly traded, man, and they're premium Arabica beans. You can get decaf or half calf. If you, as a cape-wearing goody two-shoes, don't need or want any stimulants in your system, and you can select from a big old assortment of blends and roasts. They even mix it up and give you a choice of seasonal blends. You can customize to get your orders when it suits you, not just when it suits some mega corporation. Sparkplug just has more of the human touch. And you should probably be a member. That gets you deals that some Otis-type person who loafs through life cannot enjoy. And you will save buckaroos on every order, you nincompoops. Oh, and this is not a Coffee of the Month Club either. If I've done my job and sold you on this, then you need to clickety-clack sparkplug.coffee/HYES into your device. You'll save 20% off your next order by using that HYES promo code. You get something good and you keep some dollars in your pocket in the process. Okay, I am forbidden to start talking specifically about Superman until our theme song plays. I now ask Mr. Andrew Luthor to do exactly that right now because I have a lot to say about this motion picture. And action. Have you ever seen Superman? Hello, friendly friends, and welcome to the 521st Talkie Talk on this podcasting channel we call Have You Ever Seen, formerly the Top 100 Project. We go a ways back into the past to review motion pictures, and we spoil the kryptonite out of them. I am your moderately humble host, Ryan Ellis, doing this on his own because it's a Friday, and my wife Bev is a Monday podcaster. What I'll be doing today is piecing through the Clark Kentian plot and throwing in some wisecracks, maybe one or two asides, or maybe 50 or 60 asides, and probably performing some impressions in this monologue. Although I don't do a very good Brando, so maybe there won't be all that many impressions. So let's start and set this all up. Superman was released by Warner Brothers nearly 45 years ago in the middle of December 1978. Incidentally, on the IMDb, no, it's not like that on the IMDb, on Wikipedia, and I've seen other places it says Superman the movie, rather than Superman, I don't know, the hot dog, the wall painting, but the actual titles in this movie is just Superman. It was well received by Rotten Tomatoes critics. 94% of them liked the film. The average rating is 8.1 out of 10, and there are 77 reviews on the site, which is quite a few for a movie that's 45 years old. 86% of audiences also say hooray. Roger Ebert even ranked it number 10 on his top 10 in 1978. I can tell you nice and early here that it was my number one movie that year, even over The Deer Hunter and... oh, what else came out in that year? Halloween, of course, was that year. Good movies, but I like this most of all. As for the sequels, well, they don't get all that much love from critics or from me either. Superman 2 does. It got 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm also a big fan of that one myself, but Superman 3 is only at 29%, and it should be. Terrible. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, was lambasted to the tune of just 10%, and it should be. You know, in Superman 3, though, that fight between Clark and Superman, that was pretty cool. Superman Returns in 2006, though, bounced back and sits at 74%, although I personally would give that one a slight thumbs down. It's not crapalicious, but I didn't love the casting, especially Brandon Routh, as Super Duperman. Not that he was bad, but I'll be saying this for this entire podcast. Nobody has ever done this character as well as Christopher Reeve. Superman certainly succeeded at the box office. It was number 2 in 1978 behind Grease. Bev and I covered that jolly musical several years ago, and we also discussed The Deer Hunter, which was 9th. But that's it for 1978. We hadn't discussed a flick that came out that year since the Grease podcast a little over 5 years ago. Ticket sales for the Superman sequels were in line with those god-awful reviews. Superman 2 was number 3 in 1981, so that's good, but Supes 3 was only 12th in 1983. Then Superman 4 bombed and ended up 69th in 1987. Superman Returns did better, though, and finished 6th in 2006. I just realized I didn't look up Man of Steel at all. I don't know, I didn't really love that movie very much, and I didn't even think of it till right this second. Oh well. The Supes was nominated for 3 Oscars, for the sound, for Stuart Baird's editing, and for John Williams' fantastic music score. Although I was reading, understandably, that Richard Donner, who directed this, thought that Jeffrey Unsworth's cinematography and also the production design by John Barry should have been nominated too. I think he's right. My two favorite John Williams main themes are Raiders and this. Yes, even more so than Jaws or Star Wars. The Jaws theme, I know. Star Wars theme, I know. E.T., so many. Some of the ones that Williams did with Oliver Stone. Great themes. And some of those scores in general might be better, but the opening theme to this, man, it's so rousing, so awesome. And Raiders, too. Superman lost out for those three nominations, but it was given a Special Achievement Award for the visual effects. They said in the marketing, you'll believe a man can fly, and they did make it look like a man really could fly. Especially for the time. It was just monumental effects coming after Star Wars. Okay, maybe not quite as good as that, but pretty close to it. A big part of that, and Richard Donner credits him on the commentary, is Chris Reeve. He really sells that he's flying with that arm outstretched thing he does. I think Donner mentions that in the commentary. Super Duper Man was inducted into the National Film Registry in 2017, so Congress is protecting this film, as long as there is a Congress, along with 7 movies we've previously covered. Die Hard, Field of Dreams, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, La Bamba, Memento, Spartacus, and Titanic. And I just realized, of course, Field of Dreams is a Scoring at the Movies entry that Chris and I did for that podcast. So 6 movies Bev and I have covered before, but 1 on my other podcast, which is no longer in existence. Young Master Kent made the goody-goody side of the American Film Institute's Top 100 Heroes and Villains. He was 26th, which incidentally outranks Batman. Mr. Wayne was 46th, by the way. Soupy Sales was also up for the Top 100 Cheers and the Top 100 Quotes. The line was, I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. Somehow Lois Lane's Can You Read My Mind? Spoken word song was nominated for the Top 100 Songs. And the nominations keep on coming. Superman could have made the Top 100 Genres because it was a candidate in the fantasy category. It was up for the Top 25 Music Scores, as it should have been. And Lex Luthor was nominated for the Top 50 Villains. By the way, I've been wanting to say for all these months since Andrew Luthor started doing our theme song, or wrote our theme song for the start of the year, Mr. Luthor. I don't think he gets it when I've said that to him in the past, but of course it's a reference to Ned Beatty saying it that way in this film. So those are the credentials. Let's find out what happens. The opening sets a great tone. We open with a kid talking over a visual of Action Comics, which I guess started in 1938, at least Superman did, 1938. A tyke is telling us about the Daily Planet and how it's a symbol of hope for the city of Metropolis. I'm guessing this is from the comics. What follows is a long credit sequence with everyone's name flying from over the camera and then zooming off into space, with John Williams' absolutely majestic music score playing along. This sequence cost more than some entire movies did back then. And ever since I heard Richard Donner say on the commentary track that Williams' music almost literally says, dun, 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 Superman, I pretty much sing along with it when that happens. I can't help it. And then the story proper starts, and we arrive on Krypton, as Marlon Brando always calls it, Krypton. Jor-El, who's Brando of course, acts as the prosecutor of Ursa, Non, and General Zod. The three tried to overthrow the Kryptonian government and establish themselves as the ultimate rulers on the planet. When all the men on the council pronounced the traitors guilty, 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 Zod claims that the decision has to be unanimous, so Jor-El is to blame if he agrees with the others, who strangely only appeared via hologram, by the way. Cowards! Interesting logic there about blaming someone who simply agrees with everyone else. Terrence Stamp gets to yell and scream at Brando here, which had to be fun, especially since Brando doesn't even get to respond to the berating. He just walks away. This is dramatic foreshadowing for the second movie, too, because Zod hollers, You will bow down before me, Jor-El! You, and then one day, your heirs! He gets one hell of a close-up on his mouth when he says that, too. And even though it doesn't last long because it's a trick, Kal-El does kneel before Zod in the second movie. But that's in the future. These bad mamma jammas are imprisoned in the Phantom Zone, waiting for the time when they're needed in the sequel, being released from their surreal triangular prison, ironically enough by Superman himself, at the beginning of Superman 2. Well, that messy business is over, but Jor-El and the council are busy with other matters. Even though it feels like that Zod trial just happened, they're all talking about their planet being unstable, and according to the future Superdad, it will explode within 30 days. But the elders just don't want to hear it. I love when one of them says, Be reasonable. Marlon Brando, of all people, says, My friend, I have never been otherwise. Considering Brando acted like a prima donna making this just as he did when they made Apocalypse Now, well, Marlon was ironically never being reasonable during this period of his career. I think he was probably the greatest actor who ever lived, but I would never have wanted to work with him post-1955 or so. Hang out with him, yeah, that would probably be fascinating. People always talk about how intelligent and funny he was. But deal with the BS? Nope. Of course, even though Brando got a lot of money for this movie and probably wasn't worth the hassle, he does bring gravitas to the part. He seems to be taking it seriously, at least in the takes they ended up using, even though he didn't take any of this stuff all that seriously when they were filming. From what I was reading, we've probably all heard these stories before. So Dad and Mom, Laura, who's played by Susanna York, the woman whose name was the one on screen during the opening when that Superman moment happens, send their new baby off in a spaceship to Earth before Krypton first breaks up, then blows up. And it's a buzzer beater. The planet goes vavoom, seemingly seconds after the little boy's ship gets out of danger. And I assume you've heard this before, but this sending your son who has special powers to Earth thing is clearly a Jesus metaphor. Jor-El is God and Kal-El is the J-Man. Zack Snyder's Man of Steel replays a lot of these scenes in the opening of their movie too, I think. I haven't seen that movie in a long time. Only it's Russell Crowe doing all the my son stuff. Pretty good casting, another pretty arrogant actor, although I don't think he's nearly the problem that Brando was. I don't think Crowe's ever been that bad. Maybe off screen. Maybe when he's not working. We've heard those stories. I do wonder what the plan was if the council did listen to Jor-El. Did they have enough spaceships to evacuate more than just one baby? And if not, why bother saying anything, Jor? Just prepare to get your kid out of there and then settle in for death like everyone else. I always like the touch that Kal-El grows from a baby into a toddler while flying to Earth, and you hear Jor-El teaching him about physics and other important facts, almost like it's a podcast. This flight takes years, even though the ship is traveling at light speed, and I guess the baby doesn't eat or drink during the flight from Krypton? He also doesn't seem to eat anything during the 12 years he spends learning from his father in the Fortress of Solitude. Poor hungry boy. They don't show those scenes, obviously, is what's going on here, but it's fun to speculate what happened with the kid especially. I didn't see any snacks in that little ship. Anyway, a key line during the voyage is, of course, when Jor-El says, "It is forbidden for you to interfere with human history." But him landing in a field in Kansas sure does interfere with the lives of Martha and Jonathan Kent, doesn't it? Makes them better, but interferes. It's like asking a person to go into a room and observe the behavior of the people there, but don't affect their behavior. But you do affect it simply by being there. I think those birds outside agree. It's a bird, it's a plane. I think I hear a plane too. No, it's a Superman podcast. Glenn Ford, who's Jonathan Kent in this, was not at Brando or Gene Hackman's level of fame, but he was a bit of a name himself. He had made stuff like Blackboard Jungle, which we've covered, and the original 3:10 to Yuma. I just said Russell Crowe. He was in the remake. Oh, here's more dramatic foreshadowing. Ma Kent warns her man to take it easy because he has a bum ticker, and a leaky heart is what's going to kill the man about 15 years later. It's a slow burn heart attack. Two key things also happen in the span of a few seconds when Pa scolds Martha Clark Kent. Then their car falls off the jack while Jonathan is changing the tire. So we find out where Soup's got his human name from, but we also discover how strong the kid is when he easily stops the vehicle from crushing his soon-to-be papa. Skip ahead to high school. Even though Chris Reeve does the voice of the teenage Clark, Jeff East plays the young man on screen. I read that Jeff East wasn't impressed he was dubbed, but what can you do? The effect of him angry kicking a football about 700 miles into the sky is cool, but him running, catching up to, and then cutting in front of a speeding train isn't. That effect is cheesy, although having the football be shot out of an air cannon that was buried underground right by Jeff East's foot is convincing. So it's not a visual effect, but it feels like one, doesn't it? Oh, and on the train is a very young Lois Lane, who has a writer's gift for invention, according to her mother. She announces to her parents that she saw the smiling young man outrunning their train, so that's why the mother says that. Her parents in the scene, incidentally, are Kirk Allen and Noel Neill. They played Superman and Lois in the 1940s Superman sequel. Clark gets a helpful lecture from Earth Daddy that he's there for a reason, and it's not to score touchdowns, even though young Kent could do that with ease. And he'd get to show up his bully, Brad, too. A little bonus. Seconds later, Glenn Ford gets to play a heart attack scene, and he does it really well. Apparently, if you're actually having a heart attack, you don't grab at your chest, you grab at your arm, which he does. Clark is devastated that Jonathan has kicked it, naturally, although I don't think the Kents had very many friends who were similarly devastated. There are only a tiny handful of people at the funeral. In fact, I think it's as many workers about to cover over the casket as there are friends in the background. Actually, you could argue the funeral's over and they're just hanging around with their friends, Martha and Clark. Anyway, it always stood out to me that there are just a couple people there at the funeral. It's always touched me when Clark laments to his mother, "All those things I can do, all those powers, and I couldn't even save him." Not even a superhero can fix a burst left ventricle, but obviously he had to feel that it's useless to be special if you can't even help your parents when they're in need. This vista of the graveyard up on a hill, by the way, is beautiful. Jeffrey Unsworth's shot, as all those S's are tough, Jeffrey Unsworth's shot is mostly just taking advantage of Mother Nature, but still, wow. Unsworth died before the movie came out, incidentally, and there's a title card paying tribute to him. I think it's before the movie, or is it after? I think it's before. One of Jor-El's crystals must have caught the news that adopted dad is gone, and now it's time for Space Dad to get in the game. Clark wakes up in the middle of the night and is called out to the barn by instinct, I guess? He discovers a glowing green crystal hidden away in the barn. Can you imagine being the Kents, having this spaceship and these crystals in your barn for well over a decade, and never getting to tell anyone about it? In the age of everyone oversharing on social media all the time, I don't think anybody could keep such a secret today, even these wonderful old coots. Although they don't seem to have any friends, so maybe it's not so hard, I guess. Unsworth strikes again with a fantastic shot of Clark standing a ways away from the house in a field of wheat. When Ma trudges out to join him, I thought, the two of them could just be on a postcard. What a great shot. The boy tells his Earth mom that he has to go, north. He just knows. Diane Lane gets a lot of screen time as Martha! Save Martha! Wait, I guess it's the other voice, isn't it? Save Martha! In those Henry Cavill Superman flicks I'm talking about here. But I don't think we ever see Phyllis Thaxter again in this movie or in any of the sequels. Well, maybe she's in the third one when Clark goes back to Smallville and reacquaints himself with Lana Lang, who we saw briefly in the football/racing sequence in this film. Come to think of it, I don't think Thaxter is in part 3 at all, though. So, one and done for her. Clark does go way up north in what should be unbearably cold temperatures, but he is an indestructible alien. Somehow, he knows to fling the green crystal off into the distance, which immediately forms the Fortress of Solitude. The superstructure looks a lot like what we saw in Krypton. Jor-El told him all kinds of things during the journey to Earth all those years ago, but did he tell him this was going to happen? Where a giant thing would emerge from ice and form itself in seconds? I wonder what a house like this would go for on the market today. Our little house costs more than $1 million, so I'm guessing this monstrosity would fetch that much, maybe more, even in 78 prices. And I bet this guy even has a second bathroom and a driveway. Clark checks out his new digs and somehow knows how to operate a series of tubes. He puts a crystal in one of them and up pops his dad's face, his real dad. Jor-El reveals that he's been dead for many thousands of Earth years. Time boggles my mind sometimes. They spend quite a while commiserating, and it's cool that Jor-El is able to interact with his son, not just have stock answers to questions he hopes Kal-El might ask. So it's basically AI. Let the learning begin. The teaching takes years, 12 in fact. I always love Brando's line that humans can be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show them the way. See, I didn't do a Brando impression there. That's very Jesus-like, although it's inspiring no matter how religious you do or don't want this movie to get. And somewhere in there, Kal-El sewed his Superman costume together. That probably happened in year 9. Home economics with Crypto Dad. Appropriately, a lot of planes are flying overhead, and there's birds. Dun, 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 dun. Annoying sounds. And I do believe a man can fly. That was the tagline of the movie. You will believe a man can fly. It's our first glimpse of Chris Reeve, although we at least heard him through all those sequences in Smallville when Jeff East was the Superface and Reeve provided the vocal stylings. Metropolis, here he comes. Welcome to the Daily Planet, Clark, where he and we meet the adult Lois Lane and the perpetually baby-faced Jimmy Olsen. Margot Kidder and Mark McClure play these two characters, of course, and in the sequels. McClure plays Marty's brother in Back to the Future, Marty! And he's also in a few Tom Hanks flicks in the 90s, including the great Apollo 13. Clark's just been hired by Perry White, and we see immediately why Chris Reeve is better than anybody else at playing this character. He's great as Superman, but he's utterly brilliant as Clark Kent. The high-pitched voice, the glasses, the slouch, pretending he isn't strong enough to open a soda bottle for his new boss. Of course, Jackie Cooper plays Perry White. Cooper started acting in the late 20s and was nominated for an Oscar for Skippy when he was just 9 years old, 47 years earlier. The Chief says Clark is the fastest typist he's ever seen, and I guess it tracks the superhero would be good on a keyboard. But I ask this, how did Clark get the credentials to earn this job? I assume they were faked. Was that a Jor-El plot too? I call fraud, Space Daddy. Anyway, Clark gets hired to work the city beat with Lois, which annoys her, but he gets the gig partly because it's made clear right off the schneid that she can't spell. Why is she in California at the end of this movie if she's working the city beat? The Clark-Lois love story is a huge factor in this movie, but even more in Superman 2. I love, by the way, Quentin Tarantino's take on Superman in Kill Bill Volume 2, when Bill talks about how Clark Kent is Superman's cover, yes, but the weak, nerdy way Kal-El chose to play Clark is also how Superman sees humanity. They're weak and a bit pathetic. I don't think Kal-El is that cynical. This movie is anything but cynical, but it's an interesting angle, one that Cavill doesn't take in the newer Superman movies, and that's one reason I didn't like him that much in that role. He's a beautiful man, he's got a great body, he's pretty good as Superman, but he's not good at all as Clark because he's basically the same guy. A mugger nearly outs Clark's superpowers to Lois on that first day on the job when Superman in disguise catches a bullet that gets fired by the robber. Lois didn't see his sweet grab, though, and he covers for what happened by saying he fainted. I love his sly smile when she walks away. She's not facing him, so she can't see him smiling. He's 30 years old at this point, but he's got a boyish bit of pride there. He also knows exactly what's in her purse because of his X-ray vision. Show off! And here's Otis. He's Lex's thug, assistant, moron. A couple of detectives are following Otis, knowing he's headed for Lex Luthor's underground lair, which is down under the subway. Lex is a supervillain, so I guess we shouldn't be surprised when he casually kills one of the cops by using a hydraulic device to push the guy into the path of a speeding train. Yuck. I like Ned Beatty in this and in the next movie, although I suppose he isn't entirely necessary. He's comic relief. Not that Lex isn't comic relief himself. He does give Lex someone to yell at besides, Miss Tessmacher! We meet Valerie Perrine as Miss Tessmacher, of course, but also here is the spectacular Gene Hackman as the double L. He's the third person with LL initials in this movie. There was Lana Lang back in Smallville, Lois Lane, and now Lex Luthor. He's always saying he's the greatest criminal mind of our time. I like the sense of perspective. He isn't saying he's the greatest criminal mind of all time, just of his own time. Humble man. And finally, about an hour in, we get a plot for this long movie. Lex just wants to make a fortune in real estate. That's pretty much it. We'll learn later that he will explode a nuclear warhead in the San Andreas Fault, so he's also a terrorist and a killer, but it's about land deals, which would drop a huge chunk of California into the Pacific Ocean. Then all the desert land that Lex has been buying will become beachfront property. It's not the exact same scheme, but I believe making a killing in real estate is also Kevin Spacey's motivation in Bryan Singer's 2006 flick. Man, there are two toxic words these days, or four toxic words, two toxic names, Kevin Spacey and Bryan Singer. Back then they weren't, though, two people at the top of their field. Who revamped this subway station to be a proper home? There's a huge library, a pool, all kinds of stuff. Lex's lair is a train stop, so it being there underground is understandable. It's not like it never existed before he got there, but he must have shelled out a lot of dollars to have this place customized for him like this. No wonder he needs to make so much money on the new California thing. He has to pay these contractors for souping up the lair. Or you take the Trump approach and not pay them. We've seen Soups in his cape and jammies already, but that was just flying around the fortress for a few establishing seconds. Time to get in the game, big guy. Lois's helicopter has a serious accident on top of the Daily Planet, and she and it nearly plummet to the street. But Clark sizes things up, changes clothes, and springs into action. Say, Jim, that's a bad outfit. There aren't a lot of black people in this flick, but at least this black guy gets to say that line. I like that line. By the way, it's a fun callback to the comics when Clark sees a half phone booth. There's no door, and the look on his face suggests that's not going to cut it. He instead uses a revolving door to blaze through the costume change. I guess no one saw that, though. It's love at first save as Superman catches Lois right after she loses her grip on the chopper. I enjoy that's a bad outfit, but I also love when Margot Kidder says, "You've got me. Who's got you?" But now Lois and the helicopter are both at a double jeopardy, safely back on the top of the Daily Planet. Two more cute touches here, and this movie is funny, are when Soups is all serious, calling himself a friend, but then waves bye in a boyish way as he flies off. Then Lois faints, comically. The new man in town stretches his hero legs and stays on the job that night. He foils a Mission Impossible-esque robbery attempt, so Ghost Protocol. A guy is using suction cups to scale a glass building, but our good guy stops the man and hands him over to a flatfoot. Now, the man in black has got all kinds of jewels in his pouch, so if he'd already stolen this stuff, why was he climbing up the building? Next up, Superman intervenes when a bunch of guys have stolen a pile of money and are in the middle of a shootout while speeding away on a boat. That boat ends up in the middle of the street in front of the police station, though, and the cops are astonished. Two of them are going to go drinking, I guess to forget what they just saw. Who's going to clean up that mess, Superman? The stakes are lowered, though, after all that shooting when the Flying Man's next good deed is to save a cat stuck in a tree. Although the poor little girl who owns Frisky gets smacked by her mother for supposedly telling lies about who did the saving. Mama does not believe a man can fly. And here's a sequence they did even more impressively in Superman Returns, although it's pretty cool here too, when Superman saves a plane that's in danger of going down. In this case, it's Air Force One. They lost an engine, but the Man of Steel pitches in and uses his flying skills to level off the plane. The pilot, whose voice is just clearly dubbed, does believe this man can fly. Back at the fortress, Jor-El doesn't exactly scold his son for showing off, but does insist he keep his secret identity. Clark says why. Well, he can't solve every problem, and humans will never stop pestering Clark to help. Plus, if he tells people who he really is, bad people might use those who Superman cares about against him. And that does happen in the sequel when General Zod uses Miss Lane as leverage against Kal-El. He says that Clark shouldn't feel bad for showing off, even though it's vanity, because vanity is why they aren't speaking face to face. Another potshot at those Kryptonians. But by that logic, though, Clark actually should feel bad for being vain, since Jor-El is mad at his fellow elders for exactly that. Again, though, what exactly were they supposed to do about the red sun getting close enough to explode the planet? They didn't listen to him, no, but how is the explosion their fault? Oh, and nobody thought of this back in 1978, but that Krypton will blow up ticking clock thing feels like a metaphor for climate change on this planet. And of course we now know that some corporations knew about climate change back then, did nothing about it, in fact covered it up. It's time for Lex again. Hackman didn't want to shave his mustache or his head to play Mr. Luthor, although he did end up shaving off the stash, but we see all kinds of wigs in his bedroom, implying he's bald. I love Hackman, but dude, if you're going to agree to play this famous character, just shave your head. He also supposedly didn't want to deal with a bald cap for the whole production, although he does wear one at the very end in the prison yard. Brando was the prima donna in this movie, but Hackman was a little bit too. Lex, Otis, and Miss Tessmacher learn about Superman's exploits, and the villain determines that it's time to meet this airborne newcomer. Now, we can believe that Lois is a great reporter, who can't spell, but they must pay her a lot of money because she has a fantastic apartment. Again, city beat. It even has a huge rooftop patio. She's gussied up for an interview with the big man. He shows up and tells her his height and his weight, his relationship status. He even reveals that he does eat food when he's hungry, although probably not when he's traveling in space for a few years or when he's learning from his father in his new mansion. Margot Kidder's career never took off after being in these movies, but this scene especially shows how charming she was. Personal demons and addictions brought her down. Plus, I think she also dared to speak up sometimes and not just take whatever crap was slung her way by Hollywood bigwigs. She spoke up. She paid the price. Anyway, she's great in this film and probably even more so in the next one. Superman is clearly intelligent, but he does a dumb thing and tells Lois that he can't see through lead. Lex will use that against him later. He announces his truth, justice, and the American way motto, and they both get all blushy about the burgeoning romance. His claim that he never lies is key to something involving Miss Tessmacher later on. But it should be noted that Superman does lie, even in this very movie. He fibs about his secret identity for one thing, so he lies about not lying. I don't know if there was real sexual heat between these two actors. I don't think there was. They came across more like feuding brother and sister. Feuding, but also friendly. But they sure do sell how into each other they are, in this scene especially. Superman, who hasn't been named that yet, has he? But he's about to be, takes Lois out flying, and she talk-sings her AFI-nominated song. This scene is very sweet, but I always wondered exactly how Lois was able to do any of this. She's clinging to his right arm, yes, but how is her body not flailing as they fly hundreds of feet in the air? Of course, she ends up holding onto just his fingertips when they're up above the clouds, and she's doing all right for a while. I guess it's just alien magic. For the second time in, I guess, 2 days, Lois falls rapidly to what would be her death after he loses his grip on her, which I almost felt like he did on purpose, weirdly. But then the man in the cape comes down and saves her. Great shot, too, where she's falling in the camera. Of course, it's, I guess, green screen, special effect, that kind of thing. And in comes Reeve on a cable, swoops into the shot. It's a pretty cool-looking scene. After Soups takes her back to her rooftop patio, he flies off and she muses, "What a Superman! Superman!" I wonder if Lois named him in the comics, too. Tell me, comic book followers, I don't know. And here's another reason this movie won an Oscar for the effects, although this isn't really a special effect, just clever staging. People had to wonder how they had Superman fly off and then Clark knocking at the door seconds later, all done in an unbroken shot, and it's clearly Reeve in both parts of the scene. That's because the shot of Reeve in the costume is a recording that's playing on a screen. Then Kidder walks inside, and a live Reeve is waiting to come into the apartment as the bumbling Clarky. And what follows is what I think is the single greatest superhero movie moment ever. And it's also why I buy that people, including Lois, don't realize that Clark is Superman. She goes into the bedroom, and he wants to tell her who he really is. He takes off the glasses, straightens up, stops acting dorky, and uses his normal deep voice for a second. "Lois." But remembers what Jor-El said about keeping the Kent identity, since people he cares about could be put in danger, so he puts his glasses back on and slouches again. I'm not saying Oscar, but Reeve is so good in these two roles, and this is the pinnacle of it. Just an absolutely perfect example of how good he is as this character, especially in this first movie. We're back to the underground lair, where Lex is wearing a brown wig with a silver streak on either side. I don't think I noticed that his hair changes in just about every scene the first few times I saw this film. I don't think I really knew who Lex Luthor was, to be honest with you, when I first saw this movie. I was never really a comics reader. Lex has figured out that a piece of kryptonite will incapacitate the superhero, and what do you know? People found some in Addis Ababa. We don't see that excursion, but we do see Lex use a remote to crash a car, and then have Miss Tessmacher pretend to be passed out on the road, as if she was thrown from the car after the accident. It's an effective distraction because everybody in the convoy is caught up in trying to help this hot blonde. It's for comedy, and it has to be for the plot's sake as well for this all to work, but pretty dumb. Larry Hackman has a brief role as a military man who's eager to give her mouth-to-mouth and a vigorous chest massage. Yeah, not so cool now. Although I don't blame him for being intrigued by her either. Valerie Perrine really ups the sexual appeal quotient of this otherwise G-rated film. She is so hot, but also so likable and cute. What in the world is she doing with Lex? Maybe she likes that gigantic brain? We know she isn't keen to spend a lot of time 200 feet below street level, though, despite the great location just way down underground. It's plain central around here today. Lex, in a curly wig, pretends to be an EMT who happens on the scene, while Otis changes the coordinates on the nuke that Hackman and chums were transporting. For some reason, Lex trusts Otis again after he enters the wrong numbers the first time, although it's the lovely lady who's assigned the dangerous task of changing the coordinates when they pull a second distraction. Why everyone assigned to move and guard a nuclear weapon tries to help out in either situation is just for comedy and convenience, but this never should have worked. At this point, there was close to 45 minutes left in the movie, but we see Jimmy and Lois preparing for the climax because they're already out in California. They're there investigating a land fraud deal, which is of course Lex is doing. Here's where Perry White tells Clark that there was a break-in in Addis Ababa, and 2 people were killed during the job to steal the kryptonite. Lex wants to confess his big plan because all villains do this at some point, very Bondian as well, James Bond. So he uses that dog whistle to get Clark's attention because only dogs and aliens can hear that pitch. So Soups jumps out the window of the Daily Planet and magically changes clothes mid-fall. A man who cares about everybody, as Lois says at the end, probably shouldn't go burrowing directly into the middle of a sidewalk just to get to Lex, but he does, turning himself into a drill and ending up on the sewer. Where are the caution men working signs that surround his new sinkhole? Superman is a menace! What follows is a longish scene that's only in the director's cut. Lex tests Superman's invulnerability. Machine guns fire at him, no effect. Up next is a corridor of flames, no effect. And then it's the opposite of fire, as ice pellets get blasted at him. He does freeze, but then bursts out of the block of ice like it's tissue paper. Steel Man breaks through Lex's fancy wall and confronts his arch-rival. Lex was lying about having a gas pellet that was going to poison a lot of people, which is what drew Superman down here in such a hurry in the first place. Other than picking Lex up by his lapels, it's nice that there's no violence between these two in their only real scene together. They just have a conversation. And here's where we get Lex's explanation of his big plan, of the 500 megaton bomb that's going to hit the San Andreas Fault and create a new coastline. Of course, the land would probably be uninhabitable for decades after all the fallout, but no matter. It's not going to work anyway. Well, it will briefly. Also, may I just say, Otisburg. Otisburg. Another future TV star who has a tiny role is John Ratzenberger in his pre-Cliff Clavin days. He's the military man who realizes the 2 nukes are not going where they were supposed to go after they were launched. Why is there no override to stop something like this, even if they never could have predicted somebody would even try something like this? The wig-wearing disease maniac warns Soups not to open the lead-lined box, but he doesn't listen, and here's that glowing green glow of the kryptonite found in Addis Ababa. Lex hangs on a chain around Clark's neck, and the superhero is almost completely incapacitated and falls in the pool. One of the missiles is headed for Hackensack, New Jersey, which is only going there to stop Superman from being able to stop both of them. Miss Tessmacher is not a completely horrible human being, but mostly she wants the 6'4" hunk to stop the missile heading for Hackensack because her mother lives there. She makes him promise to save the New Jersey missile first, and we know he can't go back on that to save Jimmy, Lois, and California itself, because he supposedly never lies. I guess these days we'd call this next thing sexual assault, but Miss kisses him before yanking off the crypto chain and throwing it into the sewer. He recovers quickly and flies off into the New York dusk. He's got a date with a nuke. Well, 2 nukes. Superific grabs the New Jersey nuke and guides it off into space, but turns to see the California missile strike pay dirt. San Andreas does what many believe San Andreas is really going to do one day, and causes a big old earthquake. The Golden Gate Bridge starts to break apart, the Hoover Dam crumbles, and a train would have gone off a bridge if not for Superman lying down and acting as the track. Through all of this, the Man of Incredibleness puts the fault line back in place. I don't know if that could ever happen, even with his strength, but cool idea. I guess that really was the Hoover Dam that starts to break apart, even though I really had questions about that, because isn't it in Arizona and Nevada? And the fault line, I looked it up, is hours away from there. Jimmy Olsen was there hanging out and taking pictures. Then when the dam starts to break apart, Jimmy would have fallen to his death, but Superman saves him. The dam sends all its cooped up water into a nearby town. Why do they build towns in valleys, especially near a giant dam? I guess a town could have preceded the dam, okay, but still. Move away, people. Because this could have happened. Lois's car runs out of gas and she ends up falling into an earthquake fault. Again, falling with this woman. To stop the water, Superman uses some giant boulders and other great big rocks to create a new dam, which is cross-cut with Lois getting sunk under more and more rocks and dirt. I guess his soupy sense tingles because his satisfaction about being able to stop the water is cut short by a realization that Lois needs him, and she needs him now. But he's too late. She's crushed and drowned in dirt, and all those powers, all those things he can do, but he can't bring her back from the dead. Things get deadly serious here as Reeve plays not just grief, but rage. Well, by God, he's going to ignore his real father's warnings not to interfere with human history, and he'll reverse the turning of the earth. This ending was supposed to be used for the sequel, which they were shooting at the same time. They shot the movies like they did with Lord of the Rings at the same time. But the producers made Donner put it in this one instead. Rather than kissing Lois to make her forget who he really is in part 2, he would have reversed the Earth's rotation and turned back time so she'd forget all that happened in that movie. I like the conflicting voices of Brando saying, "Forbidden, forbidden, forbidden, forbidden," while Glenn Ford is saying, "You are here for a reason." Who do you listen to? Turns out, Earth Dad. So he reversed his time by flying around the Earth dozens of times. Okay, all the carnage in California never happened after this, I guess. But he still had to save New Jersey first, right? How is it that he was able to do that, but also able to stop the San Andreas nuke from ever hitting the fault? I was never clear on that, and I'm still not. But that brings me finally to the movie in a nutshell. So, Superman, in a nutshell. East Coast journalist foils Californian real estate scam. Because the real hero in this superhero movie is the media. Always the media. Heroes. One and all. Superman's relief that Lois is all right is another nice moment Reeve plays. They're about to kiss, but Jimmy runs up and gets in the way. Now, if the dam didn't break after all, then why was Jimmy left on his own with no food or water, snakes everywhere? And yes, we all know what Jimmy has realized. The Superman really cares about Miss Lane. Maybe someday, if he's lucky. Superman rounds up Lex and Otis and flies them directly into a prison yard with an apparently British warden in this American prison yard. Who is it, Superman? Roy Stevens was an Englishman, I looked it up. He was probably cast just because they shot a lot of this movie in London. But should he sound so British? You dubbed the pilot. That was clearly not that guy's voice. Anyway, Lex pulls off his wig and reveals a bald head. Or a bald cap, actually. So Hackman obviously relented, even if only briefly. This coda is corny and almost flat-out stupid, especially the warden's performance, but also Reeves' "Don't thank me, we're all part of the same team. Good night." Ba-ba-da-ba. But I love it anyway. Because the warden's just so bad. Plus, it's all redeemed by one of my other favorite movie moments in this epic movie, when the alien flies off into space and smiles directly at the camera. That on-the-nose bit of corn I absolutely love, and so did the people who made the Superman film, obviously, because they used it at the end of all four of them. But yeah, I always give that last shot of Superman a huge thumbs up. Literally, at my TV, thumbs up. It just gives me such joy. And what a fun ride this movie was. The world is safe again, Superman. Thanks to you. So the cast. This is so obviously Christopher Reeve's movie, but he wasn't top billed, partly because he was an unknown. Brando and Hackman were huge names, although neither is in the movie nearly as much as Reeve is. Not even as much as Kidder, I don't think. In fact, in the opening, those two guys are above the title of the movie, then it's Superman, so the title Superman, and then it's Reeve's name. He was trained by Darth Vader himself, David Prowse, so that meant they had to reshoot some of the effects shots of him because they didn't match anymore. I liked Reeve's work in The Remains of the Day, which I think we'll cover later this year. That performance, and this one too, of course, helped prove that the man might have grown into a Cary Grant-esque actor as he aged. But bad luck changed all that when he was only in his early 40s. That's big things to say about him as Cary Grant, but he's got the height, the looks, the debonair quality, sense of humor. I'm sure everyone knows, but Reeve broke his neck when a horse pitched him off its back in the mid-90s. He lived as a quadriplegic for a good long time and seemed to have a happy life in spite of all that was taken from him in May 1995. And he died, I think, about 9 years later. I mentioned Cary Grant a minute ago. Well, apparently when Chris plays Clark, he's aping what Cary did in Bringing Up Baby. I also read about some comparisons to Harold Lloyd, especially because of the glasses and the aw shucks qualities he has when he's playing Clark. And what did Bev and I recently cover? Why, Harold Lloyd in Safety Last. And he is easily, it's not even remotely close, my favorite Clark Kent. Cavill and Routh weren't bad at playing Superman, although Reeve was better at that too. But the way Reeve does Clark, especially that scene I talked about where he changes in the same shot from Clark to Superman and back to Clark, makes me believe that people can't tell it's the same guy. That's never been equaled by anyone else who's ever donned the cape. Marlon Brando was in 4 films that we covered when we were still talking about AFI movies between 2013 and 2015. That quartet was A Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, The Godfather, and Apocalypse Now. So 2 by Elia Kazan and 2 by Francis Coppola. But Brando hasn't been in a movie that we've discussed since we analyzed The Great Apocalypse Now in May 2015. Marlon was a problem child during Apocalypse Now, of course, but he was pretty bad while working on this, too. He got paid so much money for only a few weeks' worth of work, but screwed around and even suggested Jor-El just be a visual effect, so he wouldn't even have to appear on screen. Something about a green bagel. It's in the trivia section. I think Brando just tested people sometimes, because he was a dick. He wasn't learning his lines anymore at this point in his career, and he would read them off cue cards. He was even doing that during The Godfather, back when he did still seem to care. I agree that a performance would be more spontaneous if you do it that way, or by having an earpiece and having a guy read lines to him as he did in the 90s. But still, be a professional, Marlon. This is your job. If it's so bad, don't do it anymore. Spontaneity, great, but this was also laziness, and because he was a huge name, he got away with it. Reeve was on Letterman a few years after The Split came out and slammed Brando for phoning it in when they made this movie, and for just not caring anymore in general, at least not about filmmaking. Chris really calls Brando out, but he's actually fairly polite about it, and he's also not wrong. Richard Donner had problems with the producers of this picture, Alexander and Ilya Selkind, and also Pierre Spengler, but Brando went so far as to sue the producers because he wanted more of a cut of the profits. That's why the hologrammy Susanna York talks to her son in Superman 2 and not Brando. Brando wasn't in that one at all. I think that works pretty well, though, to have the mother be the one to talk Kal-El through discussions about love and humanity. Plus, it's only fair. It's not like she gets to say much in her one scene in this movie. And it all worked out in a way because Superman Returns ended up taking advantage of a lot of the unused Brando footage, and it was after he died, and maybe only because he wasn't alive anymore, he couldn't challenge them on using that footage. Gene Hackman was on the AFI list 3 times, with Bonnie and Clyde, The French Connection, and Unforgiven. Bev and I have also reviewed Gene's work in The Royal Tenenbaums, so funny in that, and The Poseidon Adventure, just late last year, while Chris and I talked about The Hacks when we reviewed Hoosiers and The Replacements for our now-ended sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies. Hackman didn't make many comedies or play a lot of funny characters the way he did here, but he was good at comedy. Look at Get Shorty and The Royal Tenenbaums for even better proof. Margot Kidder shines in this, but also in Superman 2. Probably more than that, really. Her romance with Reeve that starts in this movie is a beautiful love story throughout that entire sequel. She was only briefly in Superman 3, then was back to being a bigger part of Super-Perfect's life in The Quest for Peace. She's indispensable in this movie and the second one. She brings so much personality and sass to Lois. Valerie Perrine was nominated for an Oscar for her work alongside Dustin Hoffman in Lenny, which came out 4 years before this did. She was also in Superman 2, but I believe it was pretty brief. I think she ends up in the Fortress of Solitude and we don't see her again or something. Ned Beatty has come up several times on Have You Ever Seen before. He was in Deliverance, his first movie. Nashville. He had that movie-stealing cameo in Network, and he was briefly in All the President's Men. He played Rudy's dad in Rudy, and he was the warden in He Got Game, 2 movies that Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. He was in Superman 2, of course, too, but wasn't in the other sequels, although Hackman came back to do The Quest for Peace. Terrence Stamp has a much more important role to play in Soupy Doopy 2. Terry has been acting for 60-plus years and is still making movies, but this is the first time he's come up on this channel. He, Sarah Douglas, and Jack O'Halloran make for a terrific team of villains in the sequel, after they were released from the Phantom Zone, ironically enough, by Superman. Trevor Howard, who's the first Elder in those Krypton scenes, Gelte, 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 was also in an AFI movie, The Third Man. He had worked with Brando a few times before, and I guess wasn't keen to do it again, although it's not like either of them had to endure the other for very long. They're barely in this, especially Howard. We know Richard Donner was the director. He went on to direct many of my favorite 80s pictures like The Goonies, Lethal Weapon, and Lethal Weapon 2, but he was also at the helm of The Omen, which came out just 2 years before this did. That being the success it was is a big reason he got this job. He certainly wasn't the Salkind's first choice. IMDb talks about so many actors could have played the characters, so many directors could have had the job. We reviewed The Omen back in 2016. Someone pointed out something I should have noticed before, but never did, and that's that The Omen's very last shot is the same as the last shot in Superman, only the tone is very different. And that's that the key character in the entire film smiles directly into the camera. One of them is a little bit scary, a lot scary, if you think about it, and the second one is nothing but thumbs up, as I said earlier. Warner Brothers did release the Donner cut of Superman 2 back when Superman Returns was coming out in 2006. So even though Richard Lester got on-screen credit for the sequel, it's really more Donner's movie. I think I heard that Lester reshot a lot of it, though. Anyway, when you watch that Donner cut, a lot of it's very similar. He lived into his 90s and died only a few years ago. He hadn't directed in about 15 years before he finally shuffled off, but was a producer on many of the X-Men movies during the last 20 years of his life. I'd say he's in the John Sturges class, a man who's barely talked about as one of our better directors, but they both should be. Sturges is the Magnificent Seven Great Escape guy. And one more thing about Superman, the Donner cut. It was good, but I think I prefer Superman 2, the original, the Lester one, because that's the one I grew up on, and I think it's great. It's one of my favorite sequels ever. I think Roger Ebert said it was the greatest sequel, well, it couldn't be the greatest sequel of all time, and there weren't that many superhero movies. Anyway, he loved it too, and I'm with him on that. Since making a big-budget superhero movie was uncharted territory for anyone, Donner's credo for the crew was to aim for verisimilitude. The definition of that word is the appearance of being true or real. So Donner knew that this wasn't going to be some actor studio, we got to strive for true authenticity in every moment type of thing, but he wanted everyone to aim for reality as much as possible, considering how fantastical this all is. I think the visual effects are believable, and they were incredible at the time, but I also think the cast and the tone Donner sets are the real keys here. The stars bring it, especially Reeve and Kidder. I think Brando's work in the end is pretty good. Hackman's a lot of fun, although that warden is so bad in that last scene. Well, I can live with that because his terrible line readings of terrible lines have always amused me greatly, and I always end up quoting, "The world is safe again, Superman, thanks to you," for weeks after I watch this motion picture. Ask Bev, she'll tell you. I watched this about a week ago. I've said that probably 50 times around her. Mario Puzo, David Newman, I didn't say 50 times, probably more like 5. David Newman, his wife Leslie Newman, and Robert Benton all got screenplay credit. Puzo was the first writer, coming off the Godfather films. Then Newman and Benton came in to, I guess, make it more comedic. Donner, though, gave Tom Mankiewicz, so he's in the Joseph L. and Herman J. Mankiewicz family. He's one of their sons, I think. So Donner gave him a lot of props for this work. Mank is listed as the creative consultant. He and Donner do the DVD commentary together, and I get the feeling from their conversation that a lot of the finished product was actually Tom's. The script, I mean. Well, that's an impressive list of names, no matter who did what. Benton and Newman worked on Bonnie and Clyde many years earlier. Then Benton went on to win some Oscars for writing and directing Kramer vs. Kramer the year after this film came out. And of course, Puzo wrote the Godfather flicks with Francis Coppola and won some Academy Awards of his own. To sum up Superman, I've never ceased loving this movie after all this time. My brother-in-law once said this was dated or lame or something, and I just don't agree with him. I can mock some of the dumber things too, but movies like this, and I have mocked some of the dumber things actually, but with a good spirit. But movies like this have always got some stupid things in them. What superhero movie doesn't have some ridiculous, stupid crap in it? A 24-year-old unknown actor wears pajamas and acts like a Boy Scout who's impervious to everything except a rock from his alien planet. That's inherently ridiculous. That should have been the nutshell, maybe. But Donner and his team hit a massive home run all the same. I put this up there with Logan, a lot of the best Batman films, and X2 as one of the very best superhero motion pictures ever made. I could have said Endgame in there and some of the Spider-Man stuff. There have been some excellent superhero films, but this, I think, is really the first one, if you think about it, certainly for big budget and everything, and I think it holds up. So that was Superman, the movie. The next time I'll be prattling on by myself will be on July 10th, when I review Steve McQueen in Bullitt. I've never been the biggest McQueen fan, and I haven't seen Bullitt in maybe 25 years, so I'll be interested to see if that one grabs me. I don't remember if it grabbed me the first time, it's been so long. The man can act, we know that, and he's cool in The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape. There's just something about him that always rubbed me wrong. But I'm going in with an open mind, I promise you. But first you'll be getting a review from me and Bev in 3 days. We'll be staring at each other across the mic as we see what's going on in Michael Bay's Armageddon, where in effect a bunch of oil drillers get to play superheroes on an asteroid. Quick note, by the way, Bev will be off on July 10th, so I'll be doing that on my own, and I probably will do an episode on the Friday as well. I might take one of these Fridays off in the summer, we'll see. But so far, Bullitt on the 10th is me by myself, but it is a Monday. If you want to tell me what you think of what I've said about this or any other film we've ever covered, fire over an email. HaveYouEverSeenPodcast@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter, as is Bev. I'm at MovieFiend51, and she's at Bev Ellis Ellis. This episode and everything else we've covered in 2023 is on YouTube. There's usually a delay with the YouTube thing, but at some point later in the day of posting this on the usual podcast channels, it goes on YouTube. The episodes are there in full, so the entire thing you would get on your podcast app. Most of the early ones have video content of us off the top, talking about the movie we're about to discuss, but also making corrections if there were any. We even discussed recent movies we'd seen at that point, a lot of Oscar stuff back then. It's been a while since we did that, but we plan to give you some more of that content again soon. And don't forget to frequent our sponsor, Sparkplug Coffee. They will give any customer who uses our HYES promo code a 20% discount. Your destination is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Thanks for listening, super friends. See you on Monday when we yammer on about Armageddon. Meantime, I'm going to spend this weekend turning my baby blanket into a cape and costume. I'm sure my dad will help me out, but virtually. And cut.